Looking now on the business breakfast at the upcoming US election and what it means for the American economy and the rest of the world. Dr. Mark Rush is Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the American University of Sharjah. Thanks very much for joining us this morning, Dr. Rush.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And we'll have a look at some of the possible outcomes of the election and what they could mean. Before we look, however, at outcomes and implications, how much of this election this November do you think is going to be about the economy?
Pretty much all of it. There's so much riding on the economy right now. Obama inherited a mess. The first thing he really tried to do, the signature piece of legislation of his administration, was to try to push through the Affordable Health Care Act. Congress basically rewrote it, completely transformed it, and then, of course, litigation ensued. And we're currently waiting to see if the Supreme Court declares it constitutional or not this month, in the next week or two.
I mean, in the Supreme Court decision on the healthcare, I mean, what's going to happen?
I think chaos will break loose regardless. I think the best of all possible outcomes is the court upholds it. There are some valid constitutional questions about the Affordable Health Care Act, but I think they're more theoretical than they are practical. Essentially, the question is whether or not the government can require individuals to purchase at least a minimum of health care. This is pretty much necessary to sustain the system. However, there's a question as to whether or not the federal government's ever had that kind of power. They can tax. Can they force you to spend? Should the court strike down that part of the Health Care Act, then it essentially begins to it causes it to fall apart. It's like a house of cards. So the best of all possible outcomes, I think, is to leave it alone and let the government work with it. But that's not necessarily the way the bet right now, given the disposition of the Supreme Court.
So how do you think that President Obama's scorecard is looking with the American public? Do you think that there will be some understanding, as you say, that he did inherit a mess, that it hasn't been an easy issue, the economy, to work through, or do you think that the election's going to be fairly unforgiving?
A little bit of both. His supporters will be forgiving, of course, but he had a lot of marginal support in key states that are currently in play: Virginia, North Carolina, Ohio, Florida. And the Tea Party has really arisen as a serious force in American politics right now, which is completely unforgiving. They want to completely dismantle. If they had their way, they'd dismantle the federal government, cut spending, and basically remove all sorts of welfare. The question is whether or not Obama can basically rise above that level of intolerance and lack of patience. The good news is the Tea Party has so hamstrung the Republicans that they really don't have an answer right now to what to do if the Health Care Act is struck down, and they really don't have a vision of what the economy should look like.
I mean, look at the Republican position. I mean, the Tea Party really has helped to fragment the party to a certain degree, radicalize it to a certain degree. Can Romney present a moderate face of the party?
To tell you the truth, I don't think so. If you looked at the last two election cycles, the Republicans have been ridiculously divided. In 2008, the principal speakers were Mike Huckabee, basically a Christian right-winger; Sarah Palin, try to categorize her yourself; John McCain, basically a hawk when it comes to war, but fairly liberal when it comes to domestic politics; and then Romney, a Mormon who, the religious issue does pervade the Republican Party. If you try to draw those 4 points on a map with a compass or something and try to find the point of balance, it simply doesn't exist. The party is essentially in the same situation right now, so they're the party of no. They have no particular vision. They haven't had a vision really since the end of the Cold War, to tell you the truth. And the bad news is that they are so fragmented is that the Democrats haven't had to really come up with a clear response yet. So we're riding on the Health Care Act, but the Democrats are completely divided themselves and beholden to their own local constituencies. So really, the fate of the economy is secondary to the fate of the political system. There is no unifying force right now in either party and no basis for consensus.
Well, this has been pointed out by a number of commentators. I was reading in the Telegraph this morning, actually, Joseph Stiglitz, the economist, saying that the US is set to fall off a fiscal cliff. And he's saying that's because that Washington is just too divided to stop it.
It is. It's astonishing. The polarization in Congress, the rhetoric. You can go into a whole lot of symptoms in the political system as to why this is the case, but essentially incumbents run unchallenged. They win, therefore, by landslides. They have lots of money. No one in his or her right mind would run for office right now unless they had an incredible amount of financial backing, which basically the legal system, laws are designed to prevent. And in terms of the fiscal precipice right now, sure, regardless of who's elected in November, Obama or Romney, number one, they have to deal with whether or not they're going to extend the Bush tax cuts, which all come to an end this year. if they get rid of them, I think it's $800 billion would come in. The other thing is, too, no one's really been talking about this a whole lot lately, but the debt ceiling is going to come back and bite them right about November 1, right in the middle of right at the election time. And so they're both candidates are going to have to address this. It's going to be a huge, huge divisive problem for both candidates. What are they going to do about the economy?
Do you want to give us a little bit of a history lesson there, actually, Dr. Rush, and explain to us the significance of those Bush tax cuts?
Wow, a history lesson in 10 seconds. They're incredibly divisive, that they are the sort of thing which has generated an awful lot of criticism. I mean, in a nutshell, they favor the well-to-do. They have not necessarily generated the trickle-down impact on the economy that their supporters would have hoped for. And so as a result now, really the Republicans are in a difficult position. And again, I wouldn't try to squeeze all this history into a brief comment, but simply put, the government needs the money, and Romney really isn't inclined, I think, to just let them die. So it's really going to be a terribly divisive issue this fall.
I mean, regardless of who wins, I mean, presidential power is to a certain extent determined by what happens in Congress as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And what's the outlook for congressional sort of makeup over the next few years?
Right now, if you look at the polls, I mean, both houses are basically divided right down the middle. 45% Democratic in the Congress, 44% in Republican, and basically a few folks say they really don't know. The Senate's in essentially the same position. I think they're predicting 47 Democratic seats, 45 Republican seats, and 8 in play. If the government's at all divided, or if the Senate does not have a big majority in favor of the president's not going to be able to do anything. He'll be fighting with the Congress again.
So we're going to see a period of political paralysis.
I think so, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's sad to say, but the United States still has not run into a crisis big enough to overcome the divisions in the political system. This constitutional system is brilliant for 200 to 100 years ago. It's not particularly good for a world such as ours today, where the government needs to act quickly.
I mean, usually second-term presidents you tend to be much bolder than their second term than they are in their first term. If Obama does win, I know that he'll have problems getting things through Congress, but where would he likely focus his energies?
I think he would focus on basically he'd be like Truman, beating the Congress, the do-nothing Congress, trying to basically embarrass them in hopes, I think, of, his legacy would be perhaps to weaken the Republican Party and pass on to his successor, he hopes, a stronger position for the Democrats. But honestly, the Republican president the second-term president will be bold for the first 2 years. As soon as the second congressional election kicks in, he will be a lame duck and really not be able to do a whole lot. Either way, the structure of the political system allows legislation and political power to be divided in the Congress, and then, as we see right now with the Health Care Act, the Supreme Court can always be called in basically to throw sand into the gears.
So which overall, and I hear what you're saying about the bigger problems facing whoever gets into power, but which looks roughly better for the US economy, a Democrat or a Republican win?
To tell you the truth, I mean, it's hard really to say one way or the other. I honestly think right now, I mean, again, how either one of them would deal with the tax cuts and so forth in November, it's hard to say. Republicans don't have a plan and the Democrats don't have momentum. Plus, just regardless of the U.S. economy, they're going to inherit problems they can't control. I mean, neither President Romney or Obama is going to be able to do much about the fate of the euro right now in the European Union, and the impact of that on the global economy as well is completely outside of their control. So I'd say it's a toss-up. Really, the hope for the American economy is some sort of unification in a political system which is designed to divide power, and it just isn't likely to happen right now. If 9/11 could not unify the government and the political system, I have no idea what kind of crisis it's going to take to force the parties to shed the polarization and work together.
Dr. Mark Rush, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the American University of Sharjah, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.